The land, the animals, and the people. Welcome to the Wolf Connection Podcast.
Definitely very excited to speak with this individual. She is an incredible woman, entrepreneur, rancher, and definitely has a lot of knowledge surrounding regenerative grazing and things we're going to get into today that's on her family ranch and beyond. She is the co-founder of Tom Miner Basin Association, and she's also the CEO of Teal Tag, and that is Malou Anderson. Malou, it's so nice to meet you. Great weather it looks like you're having over there. How's everything with you today?
Oh, thanks for having me. What a pleasure. Yeah, I'm doing great. Yeah, it's incredible weather. We're in the mountains of Montana and very little snow, and it's a little concerning, but it's sure we'll take it for as long as we can get it.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, just talk about where you are right now, because I was looking and I didn't get a great gauge of where exactly your family ranch is. So just give everybody a background of where you're settled actually up in the mountains of Montana.
Sure. Yeah, I'm up in southwestern Montana. So our family ranch is in Tom Miner Basin, and that's just north of Yellowstone National Park, smack in the middle of the greater Yellowstone ecosystem.
Awesome. That's terrific. And so did you grow up, because I was reading a little bit about your background, you grew up in the West and then you went east for school, right? Is that correct? Just give everybody a little bit of your background and what that, I guess, culture shift and dynamic was growing up in a wild place and then going sort of more of an urban situation for schooling.
Yeah. Yes. Born and raised here. Well, basically born and raised here in Tom Miner Basin, born in Livingston, Montana, which is the closest town. And yeah, went to school here. My dad was in the school systems as well, a teacher and a librarian, and then became a superintendent. And, yeah, back then it wasn't as wild. I mean, it was certainly wild, but we didn't have the grizzly bears were almost all completely gone, and there were no wolves at that point. We were raising sheep up here with some cattle. And so now it feels a lot wilder with everything having bounced back in terms of wildlife conservation. And then, we value education greatly in this family. I'm the third generation on my family ranch. We've been here since the mid 1950s and ranching and learning all the trades of what that looks like for us. But again, education always being really centered in our family. And so many of us have gone off to boarding school, gone away to college, and we're really thankful for that education. And so my high school took me to Kent School in northwestern Connecticut. And so I spent 4 years at boarding school there and then continued my college education through the West, through Colorado, and then finishing up in Montana.
What is it like to have that sort of instillness, institutional sort of wanting to have knowledge from your dad and I guess from your family in general, and to be able to cross-pollinate these cultures growing up and working with the land, and then also gaining the scholastic knowledge and merging those two things together?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think, mainly, my family, I think looking back, my grandparents and my parents and really a lot of the people in that generation, my family, were very diplomatic. They were always it seems to me, they were the people in the rooms that were easy to talk to, that cultivated and sort of held hard conversations. They didn't shy away from hard things. And so my grandparents, when they moved to the basin, they sort of paved the way with that, with questioning the way traditional agriculture looked, certainly learning traditional agriculture from all of their good friends and neighbors in the area when they first moved here. But also, again, like there's old stories of my grandpa saying, things like, well, why are you shooting? Why are you killing all the rattlesnakes? Like, just questioning all these old paradigms. And so I think that really paved the way for us to sort of, cross-pollinate, as you would, this space of being able to be friends with anyone in the room, no matter what their visions and ethics are, and so that really has helped us in that, just kind of almost shape-shifting in a positive way, if you will.
No, I love that. That's a great word to use. Where did that paradigm shift start with you? Would you say your parents, or were you that paradigm shift as things were sort of going? Where did that start?
It definitely Gosh, it's a great question that I've really thought a lot about. I'm not quite sure where it started. I think it started a little bit with my grandfather and my grandparents, my grandmother. My grandmother called our ranch to us when we were raised. She would tell us, this is your spiritual asset. This is not an asset. This is not a financial asset for our family. Certainly it was a financial asset, but she raised us to believe that this was our spiritual asset. And that allowed us all to look at this land in a different way, to understand that this was never going to be a place we make a lot of money. This was a place to take care of and to fold into and to live our lives. And so I think that was a paradigm shift in its own. And then really my dad and my dad, my mother, we were raising sheep at the time that the wolves came back to Yellowstone. And we were some of the first producers to see a lot of loss. And it wasn't just sheep loss. It was guard dog. The wolves were killing our dogs. We had, in every traditional way, every reason to not want the wolves around and to hate them. And instead of doing that, we decided as a family that this was not the best place to raise sheep, that it's an incredible gift to be able to look out our window and see wolves on the landscape again. And you don't hear that narrative from ranchers in this area very often. And so I think that also became a new paradigm shift for us and sort of started us into the regenerative frame of mind in terms of agriculture and the way of being out on land.
Yeah, you touched on so many things there. For you as a young woman growing up in the West with those shifts happening, both in the wild part of it, like you said, with raising sheep and wolves coming back and carnivores recolonizing on the landscape, what did that sort of instill in you as, you have this great understanding of what the land means, and you talked about the spiritual aspect that your grandmother brought in sort of. What is that? What did you pass down with those lessons to now your family that continues on today in this ranch that we'll get into in just a minute?
Yeah, gosh, that could be a whole podcast in its own, but I think most importantly, just sort of this fundamental belief that, to get really poetic, because I love to get poetic, this fundamental belief that, we all belong to each other, that coexistence to us means we all have a chance to thrive and survive up here. And so that's not for us. That's not butterflies and rainbows and like, yay, the wolves and yay, the bears. It is, but it's also like, we expect that in return from them as well. We too are trying to be up here and to live up here and survive up here. And so it's almost like looking at everything as a sacred thing instead of picking and choosing what is sacred and what is not. And so I think that's one of the fundamental values of our family. And so passing that down to our children of, we are not dominating this landscape. We don't want to impose on this landscape. We want to fold into this greater natural system that's already extremely abundant and successful. And how can we mimic some of those pieces so that our agricultural operation and the way we're out on land is also viable and successful and regenerative. So that kind of
that's wonderful. I mean, how are you able to square that circle, I would say, with other folks that may be looking at, if they heard what you just said to me about carnivores taking, your livestock, your flock, things of that nature, and impeding necessarily on your economic growth, to switch to that regenerative, that we're one with the land, we need to have this reciprocal relationship. How do you have those discussions? And I'm probably moving down sort of our conversation just a bit, but I'm curious as to how those conversations flow maybe today as you're talking with others that may be experiencing some of these other issues, I would say, that you have experienced since you were a teenager or probably even younger.
Sure. So what you're asked, just so I have it clear, like the traditional rancher aspect, or sort of the people who have some major conflict, like how do I bridge that conversation?
Yeah. How do you bridge that conversation? Yeah. From your personal experience that you've had.
Well, I've certainly had a lot of experience in this. My degree's in psychology, so I have a background in psychology. I just happen to be a multi-generational ranching woman that lives and works with bears and wolves. And so I think that piece for me has always been really helpful in the hard conversations, because I understand the depth of human trauma. I understand the depth of othering and putting ourselves different from others. And so I tend to go to a really compassionate place of really everyone wants to everyone has stories. Everyone wants to have their stories heard. Many people, especially in the ranching world, are deeply nostalgic and sentimental in their culture, and we want to preserve that culture. And even though there's been some pretty negative things in agriculture. And so it's really just finding the threads that make sense and that we connect on, and then moving into there. The other piece for me is really, when I'm speaking to the traditional or conventional agricultural person, I typically don't talk about like pro wolf or pro bear stuff. I talk like, let's talk pro healthy waters, biodiversity. Let's talk about climate resilience and drought resilience. Let's talk about how to keep your cattle alive in wild places. And so the language shift is really important there, so that they are seen and they understand that this is a problem and we're there to help them. And also challenging to really step out, challenging us all in agriculture to step out of this victim piece that we tend to be in and have been in since we came to the West. Challenging some old stories, like the progress of the West. And those stories are deeply important. And in my opinion, they are just as important as the indigenous pieces, all the stories that meld together about the modern West and the Old West. And there's some incredible things we can learn from those stories. And so just really allowing people to have the space to just share. And then when we find these common threads, which end up being, oh, my grandpa did that too, or he had that same baler, or whatever it is, and then connecting in and just having more compassion for each other's, more empathy for each other's stories and narratives.
Storytelling is such a huge way for us as a species really to connect. I mean, we see that when we're at the sanctuary all the time, is stories really open up everyone, I think, to resonate with someone, even if they might not necessarily agree or have the same experience. And so storytelling is such a viable tool that I think we sometimes brush it off, as you say, sort of poetic or woo-woo-y or however we want to say. And when you use storytelling, it's great because we're remembering the things that maybe our forefathers and foremothers went through, and also sort of realizing, hey, maybe some things were skewed a little bit. And there's a way that we can sort of embody these things. I want to get into, because this is really heavy in both your family ranch and Tom Miner Basin Association, is ecosystem stewardship. So what does that mean from your perspective as someone who has been in this for quite some time? Just describe ecosystem stewardship and how that is maybe a main pillar of what you all do.
Sure. I just think ecosystem stewardship is, just really taking care of a place, being a place's person, being a place's people. And then when people are connected and healing through land and place, so does the land and so does the place. Like, we all need each other. I also think that I struggle a little bit with the word stewardship, and my family and I have talked about this over the years, and we actually got this from an old ranching friend who's just so near and dear and so awake. I hate to say it, but it's true. I want to be careful with those words, but he is truly awake. And he always has said, as a sixth generation rancher, that the land does not need stewards. The land needs partners, peaceful partners. Stewardship to me starts to feel a little bit like, here we are, oh gosh, it's a good thing we're here. Gosh, look at you. It's, we're here to save you, and thank goodness. And we're here to take care of you. And so it comes from a good place, but I want to challenge us all with, like, what does that really feel like? Because to me, that kind of puts human in the center, and like, oh, thank goodness the human is here to fix, when actually the human was there that really decimated so much of what we need to try to fix now. And so really, I think, switching that into something like a peaceful partnership, that's really what land needs. Land's going to be okay. When it's all said and done, land's going to be okay. I think we may not, but I think she probably will. I think it's just really important to just take care of the places that we call home and our communities. And that community looks much more than just human. That community is everything.
What are some of the ways to promote that peaceful partnership then? If we switch from that word of stewardship, what are some of the ways that you on your family ranch are doing sort of that peaceful partnership with the land? And we'll get into regenerative agriculture and things like that.
Yeah, great question. There's a few things that come to mind. One of them, I'll try not to get on tangents. One of them is the idea of, like, for instance, we hire range riders through the association, and we started the first range riding program in the area. My sister-in-law Hillary did, and I coordinated the program. And one of the things our range riders are trained to do, a good range rider is a very unique individual. And the reason why is because it's not just sort of a seeker, range cowboy, cowgirl, horsewoman, horseman, your sort of stereotypes of all those roles. It's more of like, you're going out into land in prayer. You don't have to be religious. You're deeply present. You have done some inner work to be walking out in a wild place humbly and aware of your surroundings, and I'm trying to understand the story that's always already unfolding around, and sort of stepping into that story so that we can see, was there a kill last night? Was there a livestock killed by a wolf pack? Did a grizzly bear come through? And in order to be that aware and that present, we really have to be that centered and grounded within ourselves. And so it's actually kind of the opposite of the egotistical cowboy. And so that would be an example of like a peaceful partnership of going out. I don't like our range riders to pack. We have to, when I say pack, I mean a gun on, to be careful and be protected, because I believe that we are different out on land when we have guns, and whether we know it or not. And so that's another example, like going out truly humble, trying to see and find the story and understand that. So that would be one example.
That's great. I want to. There is a question that's just burning here for me, because what you're saying is, so there's so much alignment, believe it or not, with our sanctuary, with some of the things you're talking about going out on the land and being humble and having this presence around it, and really connecting with it on a level, as you say. And that's very interesting. You bring that up about not packing and going out and, I want to say, almost experiencing the land for what it is and all the wilds that could exist. I want to maybe tie in your psychological background here and breaking down those stereotypes, because you've mentioned a couple of times about breaking down stereotypes of what an actual, cowboy, cowgirl, cowman, however we want to arrange it, and sort of rephrase all of these things we've maybe been taught wherever we grew up. And so how are we learned about these things? Where does that fit in your pillar maybe of sort of this peaceful partnership about reframing and re-explaining these stories?
So what I've learned in that reframe, and this kind of goes back to how to have these conversations with the traditional producer, and I don't really know what to call them other than that. But the reframe is really doing some serious work around the human trauma that is like the toxic masculinity in agriculture, if I were to actually put a very specific thing on it. This notion of domination, of a sterile landscape, of being extractive, and all these things. And that all comes from this need to survive and this like these inner wounds that we as humans have. And it could be from generations ago, or it could be as simple as like, gosh, let me really stereotype. Dad never told me he loved me. Grandpa never gave me a hug. I mean, and I know that those are very little things. It's just an example of like how that culture comes to be. Like, for instance, Montana's number one in the lower 48 for suicide. Agriculture ends up being one of the highest ones, and they know why, because this is a deeply impacted culture of, we don't talk about our feelings. Man to man, we happen to probably drink a lot, and then we also all have guns because we all live in Montana. And so when you get this really horrible connection, it's like the point is this deep trauma that no one ever talks about. And then that's how we then move out on landscape, and we're ironically, we're the ones closest to soil and working with land, and we often are not connected, and actually often exhausted and angry and reactive. And so then that reaction is even more in the forefront when you are trying to ranch in wild places where there are wolves and bears and they're killing your livestock. Understandably so, those producers are angry, and they don't have the behavioral or psychological mindset to take care of that conflict. What we found, or what I found, is the biggest challenge in terms of a tool set to deal with conflict prevention and reduction. And when I say conflict reduction, I mean livestock and wolves and livestock and large carnivores, is the mindset. It's not getting the electric fence. It's not creating a strategic grazing plan. It's not doing all these things that we know really work. I mean, those things can be a challenge too for people, but it's shifting our mindset into not being so reactive, not being so angry, and being open, having an open heart, and sort of consciously connected to what else is happening. And so the other piece of that peaceful partnership is actually not going out on land as humans, always trying to find a solution. I feel like that's where we get lost in the mud, is just humans are always trying to find the answer. And what if there is no answer? And what if the answer is really just a better understanding of a greater natural system that we are a part of or not? And that's that peaceful partnership again. It's just walking out just to have a better understanding of what's happening.
It's so difficult to try and really peel away or unwind a lot of that trauma. We've seen that with folks, the youth that come on our sanctuary. I'm sure you see it when you have these conversations or you're looking at it, in trying to give people the tools that they need from a very foundational standpoint. Because a lot of the conversations we've had on this podcast, and a lot of them sort of regurgitate the same things, right? Is that we're angry about maybe carnivores on the landscape, or there's not as many elk, or whatever that may be. And a lot of these things come down to, like you said, the personal aspect. What are we dealing with internally that we can, I don't know if you've seen this or heard about this, or you've used it, is mirroring that landscape, or mirroring what these animals, these carnivores at some level, or even these ungulates, are mirroring back at us. Has that ever come to the forefront? I see you nodding your head a little bit. Has that ever happened?
Yeah, I'm just smiling because my other work I do, it's called Equus. And so I partner with horses and landscape, basically, to help people move through their own story, and to, again, exactly that, this reflective nature of the inner and outer landscapes and how identical they are. And then the weather that moves through the landscapes being like the stuff that happens in our lives, and how do we know it's temporary and move through it knowing that it's temporary? And this reflective nature comes up all the time. And I'd like to sometime really go into this inner carnivore. I spend a lot of time in a lot of circles around people who have a very different set of values about wolves and bears than I do. And I end up feeling like I need to be a voice for the voiceless in these circles. And what comes up for me is some of the most extreme, and I hate to say it, but they are men. And sometimes it would be refreshing if there was like a woman in these circles, but they're mostly men. And what comes up for me is like, wow, these guys are truly, they think that they are heroes in these local landscapes by killing the wolves, by helping the rancher. And they're always searching for the carnivore. They're hunting the carnivore. And I think paradoxically, or ironically, it's like they never will be able to find they cannot find the carnivore within themselves that really need to be hunted. The carnivore that needs to be killed is this deep trauma within themselves that creates the hatred and the fear around everything else in their lives. And that's the predator that needs to go. And so it then reflects into the outer landscape, and they're trying to kill all these other predators. And I really believe it's like exactly that, a reflection of that predator within them that they probably have been carrying from other lifetimes. I mean, I get real mystic real quick, but I believe in that. And so yeah, I think that there is a very powerful piece there that we don't talk about enough.
And it's how do we set people up, anyone for that matter? It doesn't have to be in this situation in particular, but how do we set people up to go into that place, to be able to find that, whatever that trauma is? I mean, are there any things that you're working with or trying to put into the toolkit that folks can have? What's something that, you talked about circles. I don't know, what does that mean? Like having circles and having discussions. What are some of the ways that people are trying to try and get into sort of the deeper part of what you're describing and healing that portion so that they can go out and do the things they need to do?
Yes. Yes, and really important, and we utilize this landscape for that as well. It's a wild place. I mean, Tom Miner Basin feels like a vortex, and people come up here and have a spiritual experience by just walking out on land here. And so we try to utilize that, and we don't exploit it, but we utilize it in a way that makes sense. That this is the space to have this. This is a space to go cross-cultural and to, for instance, we have a project called the Common Ground Project on the ranch, and it's my brother Daniel's organization, and that's exactly what it is. How do we gather around fire? We have teepees that were created by the native indigenous people in the area. This has been a cross-cultural project that has been a beautiful example of how we as people can heal together, even when we've done all these awful things to each other. And so, again, creating and holding those spaces for that conversation to take place and that dialogue to take place, and then having a lot of support so that people can move through it.
Man, I mean, these are all just, it's incredible, the through lines, just having just the first part of this with you, with what we do really at the sanctuary, is having these, like you said, these cross-cultural, these meshing of different lifestyles and different ways that we were all brought up, and that we can help each other. And it's really about having support. And I think those are the things that maybe we've also been taught, speaking from a male's point of view, is that men need to take care of a lot of the things and the support is not necessarily needed. And so that is probably something that adds to, I can just speak personally, adds to, or compounds of the pressure and societal, whatever it is. So it's just, and it obviously, when we talk about folks who work in the agricultural industry that are trying to do the right thing, and when things start to get compounded, it's really never the carnivore's fault. It's the tipping point where everything explodes and says, okay, I've had enough. And whoever it can be, and we're not just obviously talking about men here, this is not out, but it's just, but we're looking at the overall picture and what we're seeing, and how your family ranch is really trying to do things differently there. I'll wrap, I guess, this part up. I'm trying to figure out a way to do this. So like what are some of the ways, or why did you feel it was important to make the ranch really sort of an educational place like this, or a place to be where you can have this type of experience? So it's not just maybe seeing how a family ranches and is having a peaceful partnership with the land, but also being able to reset, recover, and then possibly, go on with their life with some tools that they never thought they had before.
Yeah. I think it's like a three-piece part. One would be that it kind of happened on its own. The land, none of us ever asked for any of this work. We just started doing it, and then it just continued to unfold. And so certainly there's something here with that, just that this is the greatest place, and apparently we're supposed to be doing this because we've been asked to. It goes back to that other educational piece. My dad being, in education his whole career, and education being really important for our family, sharing knowledge, back to that sort of shapeshifter diplomatic piece where we've just always, it's been easier for us to bring up hard things sometimes. And I know that's broad stroke, but that's what's coming up for me. And then I guess, was that the three-piece? So yeah, I think that, and then we have, I have a psych background. I have a sister who's a therapist. I have a brother who's a conflict, specialist. And so it's like our work together too, off the ranch, we all had to leave the ranch and get our own careers. And it all just sort of happened to be that much of it was either sort of regenerative ranching or really helping people. And so that cross part of humans and place and people, kind of all people, place, and all those things coming together and healing each other at the same time.
The Wolf Connection podcast is now sponsored by our new partner, Jacques-Marie Mage. This LA-based brand is known for their limited edition, handcrafted eyewear and luxury goods, but also for their stewardship program, which supports various nonprofits and individuals who are working to protect a future for wild wolves.
Yeah, I mean, you seriously, the three of you just sort of went out, came back, and you just brought amazing tools back with you for everyone else. I mean, you really were truly called to do this stuff. Get into the regenerative agricultural stuff, because this stuff fascinates me as I look more at places that are doing this and people that are understanding that the land not necessarily needs our help, but we have done damage like we were talking about earlier. Yeah. And so how we're able to get back to maybe the ways that the land was taken care of prior to maybe westward expansion. So just talk about regenerative agriculture, regenerative grazing, and the way that you guys do it and why it's so important for the ecosystem where you guys are.
Yeah. Well, gosh, again, big conversation. And
big conversation, yeah.
Yeah. Regenerative is a big word right now and being used also politically in some kind of concerning ways. And so that'll be interesting to see how that whole thing goes through. But truly, regenerative to me and to my family, and I should speak just for me, is really about those greater, bigger successful natural systems. And so, we can go into the micros of regenerative ag, which is like, keeping soil covered and supporting biodiversity and supporting soil health, and really getting into carbon sequestration, all the things. But in a place like Tom Miner, it's more on like a macro level. So it's coexistence with large carnivores. It's really looking at, like, again, wild landscapes and how to fold agriculture into wild landscapes in a way that's promoting the land first. So it's kind of that, I'm sure you've heard, like, there's cattle first operations and there's land first operations. And so our priority is to utilize cattle as a resource to better our soils, to manage our soils, and to make amends from degrading our soils. And then in return, our cattle are gaining beautifully. They're in these beautiful grazing plans, strategic grazing plans that make sense for riparian areas, for wildlife species, for native grasses. And so that whole system kind of comes together. And so we're not apart from that system. We're all moving together. And so that to me is regeneration. And in a system that is constantly moving the right way, we are regenerating.
Yeah, there's so many incredible things. That's why I'm grateful to talk to you about it, because when I'm looking at it, when I was looking at the TMBA and sort of the landscape management portion of it, increasing the health and vigor of the landscape, rotational grazing, following bison. Is there something something that either your family ranch or others are trying to do? Is graze similar to bison or follow? What does it mean by following bison or rotational grazing for people who may not understand what that means? Because these two ungulates are clearly different in the way that they graze. So how are you trying to marry those two things in some way so that it helps the landscape as a whole?
Yeah, great question. So we try to using strategic grazing plans, which are different than rotational grazing plans. Rotational grazing plans can be strategic grazing plans, but strategy is really about like looking deeper at our grazing and not just like a time, like, oh, good, we went through these pastures, now we're going to go through these. Like why and when are we in these pastures? What's the water like from May versus October? And really getting in there. And for a place like Tom Miner, it's strategizing around predators. And so we're not going to put cows with calves in a place where there might be an active wolf den right next door. We are not going to put brand new calves out on the landscape when we have hungry bears coming out of hibernation or wolves denning with pups. And so we're looking at all of that in a way that, just makes sense for the place. The other piece for Tom Miner is just, again, this kind of goes back to what you were talking about earlier in terms of like shifting over to a regenerative operation. There are some very big challenges there because the loss rate, the birth loss rate, or the livestock loss rate in the wild, I shouldn't say livestock, I'm sorry, wildlife loss rate is a much higher percentage than what we can handle in agriculture. So do you know what I mean by that? Like there's more.
No, please go ahead.
There's Explain more that. Like deer dying in the past, in a wild system, there's more elk fawns dying. That percentage is higher than what agriculturally we can handle. So we want our death loss much lower so that we actually can make a viable income on our agriculture. So that would be an example of those challenges of like people don't consider that. If we were to fully be regenerative, we would have to take a much greater loss if we're mimicking natural systems. And so it again, just examples of why there is shifts there. But I'm trying to remember the other part of your question.
It's just like, how do we, like, following bison, or like how are you using cattle in a way that is helping the soil, or what are we doing with the soil as well, to make sure that these pastures that you're grazing on ultimately regenerate either the same or even better, if possible, the way that it would naturally happen when bison go through a pasture and do that.
Yeah, and so it's really the difference between conventional grazing and natural grazing. And so long ago, eons ago, there would have been many, many thousands and thousands of bison that would have come up through the basin. They would have kept moving. They would have stayed bunched together for power in numbers, safety in numbers. It's much better to be a bison mom than an elk mom in a wild place like this. That's why I was saying the elk fawns, they're the ones that go. And there's a whole reason why this is part of our natural system. And so we want our cattle to be reminded that they are actually, they are instinctually related to a bison more so than an elk. Even, they're not related at all to an elk. And so the bison would have moved up here in many thousand, hundreds of, or maybe 20 or 50,000 bison would have come up here, moved through this landscape, would have kept going because of predators, would have kept going because of food source, and also like pooping and peeing wherever you're eating. Like it would have just kept them moving, as opposed to conventional agriculture and grazing, where you bring a whole bunch of cattle into a pasture, you keep them there until they eat it all down, and then you move them out. And so we're just doing the same thing with our cattle. And the reason we started doing it was because our cattle were going to be safer from predators. So we want our cows to be reminded that they're more like bison. We want them to stand their ground. We want them to stay together in bunches, power and safety in numbers. And with that, it just also naturally builds soils. It's the way bison would have moved as well. And so we're not overgrazing places. We're keeping cover. We're watching water source. We're fertilizing everything. And so we are sort of mimicking the movement of predators by using electric fencing, by using range riding, by moving these cattle in a way that make better sense for the landscape. Right. Poorly managed bison is even worse than poorly managed cattle. And so it's really looking at how bison used to move and mimicking that behavior.
Yeah, I know it's tough because we're used to, I think, having an and not wrong, but we see everybody has attachment to their domestic animals, whatever it be, whether their dog, their cats, their cattle, their sheep, whatever it is. And so it's making sure, like, as you say, promoting this instinct that's probably in there somewhere and trying to access sort of the key to that, idea of we're going to protect, we're going to move. Describe too a little bit more about these weevils. I saw this too with these beetles, which was incredible. And the noxious weeds. Are there grasses or weeds, some things that are taking over sort of these natural landscapes that need to sort of be dissipated in order for the natural grasses to grow? We had Delia Malone on a while ago, and she really talked about this in Colorado, where you're seeing weeds really take over spaces that are impacting not only the landscape, the physical landscape, but also worrying about creeks and rivers and things like that. And you were, I saw this on the Tom Miner Basin with weevils and sort of eating these weeds. So describe sort of the issues there and what we're trying to do to mitigate that.
Yeah, really just, again, looking at where humans have laid, where we have been the issue. And so typically where we've seen noxious weeds come in and rangeland or wildlands just change drastically, it's typically been because of an over disturbance, usually overgrazing. And so what can we do to make amends and to start to try to heal that landscape as well? This is where stewardship does come in, but it's not, again, centered in human. It's like, oh my gosh, what can we do to at least help this situation? And so and then this also goes back to like not solution based, but better understanding. And so what is that natural system? What makes sense in natural systems? How does the natural system repair itself? And that would be with insects, other natural systems. And so it's really just experimenting. And this place is an incubator. And that was the third piece of like, why the basin and why do we do this? Because the basin is such a uniquely abundant place for all things that it's a wonderful spot to incubate ideas, to explore and experiment different tactics and tools. So weevils was one of the many integrative approaches that we've tried for noxious weed control. But then also we do understand that, we believe that there are no weeds, that these are all plants, and they all all have a purpose, even the ones that are steeply disturbing and scary to us. There is a purpose and there's something there. There's a story unfolding on that landscape, and that landscape is showing us what's happening. And so again, just really observing, collecting data, trying all kinds of different things. We don't want to mitigate anything necessarily, but we do want to reduce the non-desirables. And we actually, no, I would love to mitigate knapweed and hound's tongue, but there's a couple. For the most part, all these plants are playing a role. And so we're just trying to better understand that role. Weevils do amazing at eating some noxious weeds. And so that's been one of the experiments.
That's awesome. I mean, yeah, and you're right. I think there's always, I think when we look at it, we take it from a human perspective. We look at things and say, oh, this is a pest, or this is something that doesn't suit me in this moment. But they're obviously, like you said, everything has a story. And it goes back to that storytelling aspect of, well, how did this plant get here? Is it invasive? Is it harming the overall ecology? How can we sort of work around it, work with it, and use it along the way, which is, I think, a wonderful approach. And there's other things that you guys do, obviously financial support, how we talked about installation of electric fencing, range riders you were talking about. The other piece that I like is that you're working with NGOs like Defenders of Wildlife. So others that are looking for the conservation piece, and again, bridging these two schools of thought, and that making sure that we are promoting healthy ecosystems, promoting healthy and regenerative agriculture, let's say, and also the promotion of carnivore and ungulate growth that's healthy, and making sure that we may not get back to the levels that we've heard about maybe in the Pleistocene, where we have millions of bison and hundreds of thousands of carnivores, but in a way that we can, like you say, maybe try and repair some of the damage we've done. So how does that relationship work when you're working with other NGOs? And again, I hate using cross-pollinate again, but making those two sections of thought meet, and how does it help when folks are looking for maybe tangible physical things like fencing to be able to help their flock or their herd?
Yeah, that has really changed a lot over the last decade. So when we first started the association, we had to be really careful about diversifying our funding in terms of getting funding from things like Defenders of, did I freeze?
Nope, you're good.
Defenders of Wildlife, and then like Livestock Loss Board, which is like the state livestock, that's the fish and game, and the other side of that coin, and so really diversifying that, so that when we come forth to ranchers and producers saying, hey, we can help you with this, this, and this, they can see that our funds are diversified and we're not like in one corner or the other. And I think that's been a big piece of what's made the association so successful in terms of creating these trusting relationships between agencies, farmers, non-NGOs, everyone. I really love to, in the past I've challenged conservation organizations of like, if we need to get some information out, we don't need to put our name all over it. This isn't about marketing and advertising the NGO. It's about getting something done. It's about helping and supporting. And so I've noticed that, it's competitive on everywhere. And so really, again, going back to like the stories, finding ways to share projects. We do a lot of like shared projects on the ranch. How can we get these two people together who are just certain they have nothing in common, to find that actually, oh my gosh, they might even be like long lost relatives or whatever from Martha's Vineyard, like that actually happens. And then really? what a great opportunity to start talking and sharing. And so, just continuing to get people together in places that make sense for them and they feel safe to do so. And but the shift has really happened. 10 years ago, we would often say like, no, from producers, like, no, we don't want your help because these are your funder. We don't want, just very old school trains of thoughts. And now there's a really beautiful shift in a lot of NGOs and conservation organizations around supporting the rancher. And it used to be the rancher was the bad guy. We're trying to support landscapes and wildlife and oh man, look at what the rancher's done. And people are right. Look what we've done. But now it's like shifting into how do we support regenerative ranching? We understand how important private lands are. We understand how important grazing ungulates are for a living and breathing planet. And to repair a living and breathing planet, we are going to have many grazing ungulates. And what are we going to do with those grazing ungulates other than eat them afterwards and be part of that larger, greater system? And so, challenging those conversations. But it's really interesting because then people end up agreeing on a lot of different things if we can just hold the space to come and gather.
Yeah, space and sacred timing is really a big thing. Another pillar of ours too is really just holding the space and making sure. And it really carries with the next thing that you guys had, which was reducing conflict. Because we're not only are we trying to reduce conflict within humans and animals, it's trying to reduce the conflict between human and human. Because the human and human conflict is really the thing that carries the weight of a lot of these decisions, a lot of these attitudes, a lot of the egos that happen really on both sides. And it's really when you're sitting in the middle, a lot of the times where we've done this podcast for almost 6 years now, and sitting in the middle is sometimes can feel like it's a lonely place because you're trying to make sure that, and everybody deserves to have a voice and everybody deserves to be able to share their story and to make sure that if we're trying to reduce the conflict on your specific area of land, your specific NGOs fighting for something, maybe we compare these things together, as you say, and to make sure that works. I mean, I think you touched on some of this stuff earlier on with range riders and some of the non-lethal deterrents. Is there anything else that you guys try to promote beside fencing or range riding that you've seen work when trying to reduce the conflict in some of these ranching spots that are on Tom Miner Basin? Is there anything else other than those couple of things that have worked?
Yeah, there's a lot that
Go ahead.
But I'd say the ones that we don't talk much about, actually, and my sister-in-law and my brother do more of this, but around low-stress livestock handling and how important it is to have the right cows with the right mindset out in wild places. And so one of the hard things that's really hard to bring up to cattlemen and the associations and anyone in that old frame of mind is almost all livestock loss is traced back, just to your point. It's not the bear and the wolf's fault. It's human indifference and human error in our operations. Almost all. Of course, there's always that rogue grizzly bears that just doing something, because grizzly bears are a lot like humans, and there's rogue humans that are doing crazy things. But almost always, and that can be traced back to things like, again, probably not the best place to have brand new calves in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem when they're on the ground earlier than the birth rate, the natural pulse of birth out in nature. So you can't, of course a bear is going to kill a brand new domestic calf when no deer and elk are having calves yet. No one's being born yet. And that's only one small example. But the low stress livestock handling is really important. What we've found is that flighty, scared cattle who are not loved and taken care of, are at a greater risk of conflict and livestock loss, because they live their lives in fear. They lift their head like an elk and they run. And again, elk calves are the ones that get picked off the most by wolves and bears. And so again, we want our cows to be confident like bison, to stand their ground, to be curious if they see a canine coming up in the field. We have 2-year-old steers that will chase off wolves when they see them, not because they're being aggressive, because they're literally curious. They're acting like sort of young teenagers that are curious, and the wolves are like, what the heck? This is supposed to be the other way, and they run. And so that idea of really treating, again, it makes sense, loving our animals and treating them and giving them respect and showing them that they don't need to fear humans actually helps them out in large places, like in wild places. And then when we come upon them and they see us on our horses, they know we're there to check on them. They're not afraid of us, and they're going to run away from us. Vulnerable cows, cows that are just out by themselves with their calves, they are more likely to get into conflict. We want our cattle to stay together and to remind our cattle to stay together. And all those things take place by handling our cattle with love and treating our cattle with the respect that they deserve. And And so, yes, we do raise beef. We do, and it's tricky for a family who doesn't eat. I mean, I don't eat as much beef as other people in my family, but it does feel a little bit like playing God sometimes. Being a beef production of having to decide what animals are ready and what animals are not to go. And the best we can do is give them the best lives, the best longer lives that we can, and treat them with respect and love. And when we do that, they are, what we found is that they're less likely to get themselves into issues that they could get, picked off by a pack. And that's not 100%, but if we live in like that 70-30, 80-20 world, that's okay. That works for us.
Do you ever try and use that as a reciprocal relationship with the wild ungulates or the wild carnivores too? Do you ever see trying to instill that love or even that acceptance? We always use this social tolerance angle, and sometimes it gets, I think, talked about a little bit too much, maybe even from myself. But what is there trying to shift that narrative about respect and love for the way that the carnivore has to exist on the landscape, the way that the wild ungulate has to exist on the landscape just to be able to survive from season to season? Are you trying to carry that over into that as well?
Yeah, definitely. We've done a lot of different things, and our tool set looks like, for instance, the ancient tool set would have been ritual and ceremony before coming into places like this in terms of humans and conflict. And there would have been deep prayer and asking the land and the place around us, like, here we are, and we don't want conflict, and then whatever that ceremony and ritual look like. And then we have our tool sets of things on the land, and then we have AI and tech. And so bring all those different things together into whatever that soup looks like, and knowing that there's never going to be one thing that takes care of it all unless we have a sterile landscape. But if we can do like a 70-30, 80-20 rule where it mostly takes care of it, that's great. And it circles back to the way we started here, which was that, we all belong to each other. I walk out on land and I look at, when I have to do the hard thing of capturing a grizzly bear after a bunch of livestock losses, not only do I have to see and have a conversation with that bear in that culvert trap before it becomes science or before it gets relocated or something, I also have to have a conversation with that cow who is, pacing back and forth with an udder that is leaking milk because her calf has just been killed. And so those two conversations are equally important and sacred. And so, yes, there's no difference to me whether it's a badger or a cow or a wolf or a human. I mean, we all have that conversation, that story that needs to be protected and at least listened to.
Absolutely. Do you feel that this culture that's been created sort of in the Tom Miner Basin and, permeating through your family ranch, that this is something that can be replicated throughout the West? Do you feel like this is something that, from your own personal perspective, that, you've seen successes and you've seen, the way that you're able to experiment and work on things there? Do you feel like this is something that could be replicated in areas that might be experiencing these types of issues, whether it be personal, financial, in any way that these places would be able to use this toolkit for their own benefits and for the landscapes that surround them and their benefit as well?
Absolutely. This is the foundation of a healthy and vibrant and successful life, in my opinion. It's whether it's in these places, this could go across all spectrums. If we move into spaces with curiosity and awareness, especially self-awareness and accountability, and we learn from our mistakes, and we are open to other people's stories, we need that everywhere in the world right now. And if all these things that were so successful in the past that degraded the entire West, unfortunately, when I say successful, I mean like in the name of progress. If that's how successful those things were, which sadly it was very successful, then why couldn't this be successful? So absolutely.
I completely agree. Yeah. I mean, you've really touched the spectrum here in this conversation, and bringing in all the tools that you have. And it's truly enlightening for me to learn from you and to learn from someone who's been on the land for as long as you have, and generationally, showing that progress can be made and we can talk with each other, and it gives me hope always to talk with folks like yourself, to know that the land is being taken care of, and that the ecosystems and the land is being taken care of, and we are able to have these conversations with each other, which is awesome. I want to touch briefly. I know there's something, because I mentioned at the top that you are the CEO of Teal Tag, and I know it's a project that's moving slowly, which is fine. Yeah. But you have there were 4 tent poles in there, and it really, you touched on the tech part just at the end of what you were saying prior, and it really seems like these two things resonate. I can't imagine they are in parallel with what you do with the ranch themselves, but your 4 tent poles, it seem like, were technology, education, agriculture, and landscape. Is this sort of a passion project of yours? And if you can describe it just a little bit for those that, and tease anyone, I guess, that's maybe wondering what this is, and how it sort of associates with the pillars that you guys have at the ranch and what you're trying to do with Teal Tag.
Yeah. Teal Tags, bless Teal Tag's heart. It always takes the back burner because of all the other things. We don't have enough going on.
Right, exactly.
But we really do. I really believe in the importance of looking ahead into thoughtful AI and thoughtful tech, and a very strong emphasis on thoughtful and accountable tech, because we're going to be in big trouble if we don't really start getting some guidelines around the technology being used. But yeah, I was out range riding in 2016, trying to find a dead calf in about 20,000 acres altogether. I mean, 10,000 acres on that side of the basin. And then once you find the calf, in order to get reimbursed and compensated for that loss of a predator, of a livestock animal from a predator, you have to get it skinned. You have to do a whole investigative report that can be extremely dangerous, especially in this place where all of our carcasses typically have, 4 to 6 grizzly bears eating on them when we come across them. And so then we have to chase the grizzly bears out with fishing game, and we have to skin that animal to determine if it was a kill or not, and then that producer gets compensated for that loss. And so I just was like, gosh, it's 2016. Like, why are we still doing it this way? This is really dangerous. And we also had a bear. One of our range riders had gotten attacked by a bear the year before. Oh, wow. And so it was very fresh in our minds of just how dangerous this job is. And so we just started thinking about, what does it look like out there? And there are some really great companies right now using tech. Teal Tags is the idea around Teal Tags is a simple, low cost tag or collar that is picking up accelerometer data around if, say, number 232 a cow out in the Forest Service allotment gets attacked. We then know in real time that something is happening to her, and then we can get a drone out there, we can get a rider out there almost immediately, and potentially in the future even start to sort of haze animals, predators that are killing domestic animals, and then obviously leaving them alone if they're not, to see if we could maybe start being like, no, just stay away from them, and then you'll be saved by staying away from them. Right. And then, just creating a safer landscape and just a more efficient, low-cost, simple tech tool that a producer could use. Producers don't want a really, difficult, complicated, complex collar that is $1,000 per animal. That's what's out on the market right now. But thankfully, since Teal Tag started in 2016, which is crazy, it's been 10 years. My goodness, 10 years. There's been all kinds of incredible stuff happening. And so now we're really focusing on the big challenge, which is like rural communications. If there's not satellite capability in some of these rural places where these animals are they're in wild places, there's really nowhere to find them. And now there's virtual fence systems. There's all these incredible things that are happening. And that was sort of the trajectory that we were on. And really what we're trying to do now is, and we've found a bit of a solution. I was just talking about, we don't want to find solutions, but this in tech, I think it's, this rural communications issue of like, how do we have better rural communications for our rural communities? And again, communities looking a lot more than just people. And so we have done that. So we're calling them sort of like teal towers, and ways that producers can purchase these towers and actually experiment with all the different types of tags and collars out on the, where they can purchase now, instead of having to go in one specific direction or the other. So making it a little bit more independent for the producer to decide what works for them.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, people love options, and I think that's what people need. I do want to quote, because you had a great Aldo Leopold quote on the Teal Tag website that says, The land ethic simply enlarges the boundaries of the community to include soils, waters, plants, and animals, or collectively, the land. And I feel like we've touched on the land quite significantly in this conversation. Malou, just tell people where they can really gain more insight about what's going on in Tom Miner Basin, about teal tag, things like that, places where they can visit and have an experience, maybe even up at your family ranch.
Thanks. Yeah, there's multiple ways to get up in contact with us. There's the Tom Miner Basin Association.org. There's the Common Ground Project.org. There's tealtags.org. So there's those websites. But yeah, just, look us up through the association is always a great way. And that comes directly to either me or Hillary, my co-founder. And we're doing all kinds of really special things. We have a lot of school groups, a lot of visiting groups, thoughtful tourism as well. With the grizzly bears up here right now, we have a lot of people coming up to see the grizzly bears digging in Tom Miner. So we're trying to figure out that next challenge. And so there's all kinds of ways you can get in touch with us.
No, this is great. My final question for you is, when you hear the word wolf, what's the thing that comes to your mind?
I just start to think about all the incredible experiences I've had with wolves out on the land and how grateful I am for that. I mean, unbelievable stories that, just sometimes I can't even believe, and how grateful I am to be able to share this life with them and to see them. So, and they are an incredible teacher. They bring up all kinds of stuff. So.
So now you piqued my interest. I have one last question. Share one of your wolf experiences.
Oh gosh. Oh man. Well, I suppose my most the one that was most emotional for me. I mean, there have been some incredible wolf stories. But one winter, it was a full moon or close to it, and it was about 20 below, and I was taking all of our dogs. We have a ton of dogs. We always have. And part of our coexistence, we always have guard dogs. I was taking all the dogs for a walk. And, at that point, we had like 5 or 6 dogs. And so I was taking them up on a walk on the ranch, full moon, super cold, get up there, and I get to the aspen grove, and all of a sudden I'm counting my dogs, and then, I'm getting to like 9 or 10, counting the canines as it's getting dark, and I can just, it's like the full moon. And then I started hearing all the sounds of like dog fights and the salivating that happens with wolves. And I was not thinking, I just wasn't thinking at all. And I just started to run home. And I made it home without any dogs. I got home without any dogs and started to call them all. And they, one by one, all my dogs started to come back. And they were all covered in saliva and panting heavily. And the sound of fighting dogs had stopped. And I just looked around and then looked up on the hillside and saw 4 or 5 wolves just trotting back into the aspen grove. And I called my brother immediately and was like, when was the last time a person was killed by a wolf pack? And he said, it was in Alaska and had been years ago or whatever it was. And it was just a profound moment. It was a profound moment of relief. It was fear. It was the first time that I was like, whoa, that was a close call. And absolutely beautiful to see that communication between my dogs and the wolves, no deaths, no big conflict, but just like this sort of tolerant, playful fighting that I think it was. And the full moon, and it was cold. It was like everything. And it was just a profound moment for me. I'll never forget. And I was alone on the ranch, so I felt very, very vulnerable. And it was really wild. Literally.
Wow.
Literally.
No, I would say that's wild. Yeah, that's good. Oh my goodness. Yeah, a story for coexistence, everyone. See, things work out in the end.
Yes.
Malou Anderson, this has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for dispelling all of your knowledge, all of your wisdom, and just keep doing what you're doing up there. It's truly fantastic. Thank you for having this talk with me.
Oh, thank you so much. And likewise, sounds like you guys are doing some pretty incredible things. So continue.
Will do. Absolutely. Just hang tight while I sign off here. How's to you all out there? We'll be with you next time. Bye, everybody.
Looking for more information about Wolf Connection or the podcast? Visit our website at wolfconnection.org, where you can donate, sponsor a wolf, or become a volunteer. Thank you for listening.